La Llorona hunting. So you want to walk on the wild side, huh? My dad and I were kind of junkies for this sort of thing. Now, don't get me all wrong or misled here. You want to actually see and touch the supernatural, right? You're not those kinds of people who just talk about it and then chicken out. You see a horror film and you think of plans on how to observe it and beat it, or even use it to your advantage. You're the kind of person who would enjoy seeking a hunt. Unfortunately, I can't tell you how many times my father and I went out to find nothing. It happens, you know. You can't ask the supernatural to appear on a whim. Everyone in San Antonio area knows the story of La Llorona, and any child could tell you that La Llorona walks the banks of a river, crying and seeking out the children she drowned before she can enter heaven. I'm pretty sure, after hearing all the stories, she's not a particularly vengeful spirit. If you don't know La Llorona, you need to research her story for yourself. You personally need to make a decision. I am not going to type out her backstory for you because it takes away your choice on whether or not you want to pursue the hunt. So stop right here if you're a Yankee from the north or need a refresher on the spooky tale. You'll only fool yourself into thinking you're ready when you're really just unprepared. La Llorona hunting goes like this. Drive along the banks of the Guadalupe River or San Antonio River with your car headlights off. Keep mindful of other motorists and go slowly. Listen closely for the sounds of weeping or a woman calling out for her babies in Spanish. Once you hear the cries, stop the car and turn it completely off. Hopefully, you might see her walking along the riverbed, crying and calling out. Just watch. Don't interrupt her or anything, and don't try to interrupt her search. It's a fun game that my dad took me along for. I started this hunting when I was just 4 years old, and I was sitting in my dad's truck as we were driving back from San Antonio. We used to hunt together until I was about 6. I mentioned that most of the time when we went hunting, nothing was actually found, except the very last time. I was 6 years old and it was my birthday. My dad forgot about getting me presents or even a cake, so he drove to San Antonio after getting off work, telling me that I could pick out anything I wanted. I was upset, of course, because as a kid we all want our birthdays to be special. The idea that our parents forgot about it or didn't care enough hurts us. It was already late and the stores were all closed. I was sitting in my seat crying for the millionth time, and my dad tried to appease me by buying a chocolate shake from Whataburger. Of course, I was crying so hard that the shake just dropped out of my hand, and my dad instinctively yelled about the product staining the floor. He pulls over to a car wash and starts scrubbing and vacuuming the floor, having enough of my tantrums and telling me to grow up about having a crappy birthday. I just turned on my shoulder and told him that I wanted to go home and I didn't want to be out here anymore. My dad gets angry and stressed, slams the door shut and tells me that if I don't stop morning over spilt milk, he'll find La Llorona and give me to her. He has sort of a bad temper and doesn't really think his jokes are as offensive as they seem. Summer nights in July are hot and unbearable, so when he hits the first bank of the San Antonio River outside of San Antonio, he shuts off the lights and stares at me. He finally tells me that he's sorry he forgot my birthday and that he had to work so late. He loves me and he's grateful that for another year he gets his daughter. I wipe away the snot and tears from my face and say, "I forgive you, Daddy. I love you." He hugs me from across the seat and tells me that I can stop crying now and he'll take me back home. Daddy, I'm not crying anymore," I respond. There's a moment of silence before my dad quietly says, "Don't look outside." And as a 6-year-old kid, of course, you're going to look. I try to twist my head around and all I see is a brief glimpse of a hand pressing the passenger side window, saying, "Mija," over and over, followed by some sort of Catholic prayer in Spanish. My dad reacts rather poorly and hastily, pulling his pistol and shooting at the window twice. The window glass falls down, and it's then that my dad has realised he's rendered his child vulnerable. All I'm doing is screaming and wailing, not knowing what the hell is going on. The car isn't turning on. My dad is shouting. I'm crawling over the seat, forgetting my dad has a ready weapon in his lap. The gun discharges. There's a sharp, short shock on my leg, and behind me I can hear noises of someone is trying to crawl through the passenger window with their whole body. From stress of the body, I throw up, and my mac and cheese dinner is all over the dashboard of my father's truck. I can feel a warm hand around my ankle, almost gripping it. And then there's a warm light that floods the windshield, bright white lights that encompass and burn my eyes, making them sting. High beams. Another car was travelling towards San Antonio and had high beams on, passing us by without stopping. My dad holds me close and kisses me, telling me that he loves me. The car turns on suddenly, and he guns the gas, holding me in his lap, all the way back home. I must have passed out, because I don't remember the drive. It isn't until morning that I see the damage. The window is broken completely, and glass is all over the passenger seat. Dried vomit is now stuck to the dashboard, and it smells like sour milk and rotten garbage. The bullet only grazed me on the shallowest surface of the skin, leaving a very unique burn mark. There's no other evidence of another person in the car. After spending a day in shock and grief, my dad cleans his car and sells the first chance he gets. He immediately resolves to work on his temper and took therapy twice a week for 6 years. And no matter how bratty or obstinate I get, he never once tells me he'll give me away or kick me out. I should mention that the tears or weeping of children bring out La Llorona faster. I don't want to, because I know some of you will intentionally drag your little ones out there, like my dad did, to lure her just to quench your thirst. Just remember, Someone out there is always going to want your precious angels, and I doubt very seriously they'll give them back. Demon in the window. Before you read any further, I want you to know that I have not hyped up or altered any of what you are about to read to scare you. I'm not easily scared, and what happened to me frightened me more than I've been in a long time. That being said, you might feel the same way after you read this. The information, locations and dates have not been changed in any way. It is important for you to know I have been involved in ghost hunting for many years. I run tours at haunted locations for newbie ghost hunters and thrill seekers. And prior to the investigation, we have a short Q&A session. At these functions, it's almost a guarantee that someone will ask me if a ghost can follow them home. I used to say something along the lines of, I don't see why not. They can be bound to a certain areas, but many spirits come and go as they please. But you probably shouldn't worry yourself. One night after an investigation of a Swansea, Massachusetts residence changed the way I felt about that answer. The investigation was conducted as normal, and after we were done, the equipment broke down, packed into the van, and off we went. While driving back to Cranston, Rhode Island, to where our cars were parked, we discussed how we felt the night went. Nobody had any eerie feelings. We all agreed that it felt quiet, and we could only base any further conclusions after what we could find in our evidence review. It was shortly after 1 a.m. when I got to my house in Attleboro. As soon as I walked through the door, I put my equipment case at the base of the stairs to my room and climbed into bed. I then proceeded to have the worst nightmare that I've ever had. The dream happened like this. I was alone. It was a dark night with a clear sky. The moon and the stars were visible. Although I had no light to use, I could still see what was ahead of me. I was in a labyrinth of some sort, walking deeper and deeper into the winding pathways. The labyrinth had tall, overbearing walls with some small glass windows just big enough to see through. Every time I would look at the windows, a skeletal face would stare back at me on the other side. It was like the walls were hollow and something was following me inside of them. My heart would race if I looked at the windows, so I kept my eyes forward and focused on the maze. I finally came to the centre of the labyrinth. There was an oval-shaped tomb-like building with a barred door on the front with two separate keyholes. Subconsciously, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a key. As I looked at the key, a hissing whisper came about in the background of the dream, saying, "This key has one purpose. This key can unlock this door." I put the key in the first keyhole and unlocked the door. As I opened the door, it was dark and there was a faint glow of orange light that I could see from the top of a spiral stairway. As I began down the stairs, I encountered this cloaked, starved, skeletal monster. Its skin was stretched tightly across its face. It had very small patches of long, straggly hair, and as it held up a lamp close to its face, I could see more clearly. Its eyes were fixed on me, and it smiled, revealing a few black teeth. At this point, I ran back to the door. I tried to lock it, but the key wouldn't work. I remembered it saying that the key could only unlock the door. I started to trace my way back through the maze. Its voice became louder in the background as I unleashed it from its tomb. I can't remember what was being said because I was running for my life. I finally came to the exit of the maze. There was a short road that I followed that came to the driveway of a large mansion. I thought I was safe for a second, and as I started towards the house, the figure appeared again at the front of the mansion gate. It held up its hand like a puppeteer would and conjured two large black dogs. The dogs chased me through the yard, and I climbed a fence to get away. On the other side of the fence, I ended up in some neighborhood that felt familiar, but there was no one in any of the houses. I entered a coffee shop and sat down at a table. All of a sudden, there was loud banging on the windows of the shop. The banging became increasingly louder until I closed my eyes, and at that moment, I woke up, unaware and confused for a moment. I collected myself, then I heard banging. I thought I was still dreaming. Unluckily, this was reality. All of the hinge windows to my room were open. It is impossible to open these windows from the outside. There is a lock mechanism that goes through the top of the window and into the wall, which then has a sliding lock bolt come through the side of the mechanism to keep the window from moving completely. Still slightly shocked, I closed all of the windows. I then grabbed my digital voice recorder and hit record. I put the recorder on the edge of my bed and went upstairs to see if any more windows were open. None of them were. Upon returning to my room, I listened back to the recorder. While I was upstairs, I captured something or someone banging on the window again. It could not get it open this time, and with a frustrated, hissing whisper, it said, "Damn you." The same voice from my dream. It was the voice of that monster in the tomb. Whatever was behind that door that I opened was in my room that night. It made its presence known. Since then, there's been no sign of it here. I've heard its voice. I've drawn its face. I will not forget what happened. You may choose to believe this or not, it's up to you. But from now on, I caution everyone, if you dabble with spirits, you need strong willpower. They can come into your life, and when they do, it can be frightening. This happened the night of March 8th into the early morning of March 9th, 2014. This was written on July 9th, 2014. the paranormal. I have believed in ghosts and the paranormal my entire life. One of the reasons is that I am very religious and that I believe that the spirit doesn't die. I am not afraid of ghosts since I believe that they mean no harm. But there is one thing I am afraid of: poltergeists. I am going to tell you about my encounters of poltergeists and ghosts throughout my life. It began when I was 5 years old. I lived in Uppsala, which is a city in Sweden, north of Stockholm. We lived in an apartment, if you were wondering. Every Friday, Saturday and Sunday, my parents would let me sleep in the living room on a mattress, since I loved being in the living room and I slept better on a mattress for some reason. One Saturday night I woke up about 3 a.m. I looked at the clock we had in the living room. After a minute I see a figure levitating into my room. I used to share a room with my big brother. It scared me. It might have been my mind playing tricks, since I was only 5 years old. But what made it so real was that it stopped and looked at me for a brief moment. If I would describe the figure, it would be a typical ghost. White clothes, transparent, etc. Though that wasn't the most scary thing about it. It was its eyes, the cold eyes. They looked through my soul, like it wanted something from me, or as if it was mad at me. Now, you may be wondering, how can I remember something like that? It was the eyes. I will never forget them. About 2 years later, when I was 7, we moved to southern Sweden, to a small town outside the city of Malmö. It was a very nice house, a typical townhouse, with a small garden, 2 floors, etc. When we moved, I started having problems with my sleep. I always woke up in the middle of the night crying. One day my dad heard me and came into my room and asked me, "What's wrong?" "It's watching me," I said. He didn't quite understand me and thought it was just my imagination and told me to go to sleep. But I couldn't. It felt like something was in the corner. It was cold in the middle of the summer in my room every night. I could easily see through the dark, and every time I woke up, there was some kind of shadow in the corner of my room. Every night, I would sneak into my parents' room and sleep there, since I felt I was safe there. I didn't understand any of these things. When I grew older, I started using the computer more. One day I googled my town and found witches used to be executed here. This is not some imaginary shit, it is actually true. I also found that in the middle of the 1800s, a boy was brutally murdered on my block, and the man hid the body in the attic. The man was convicted of murder and was executed. This might explain my next encounter. One day I woke up 4 a.m. I put on the TV and started watching the bad shows, which show up early in the day. Suddenly the door slammed up violently. I closed it, thinking it was just the air. But after trying to fall asleep, something didn't let me. I started thinking about the door, and I eventually went downstairs and watched TV there instead. Suddenly something in the corner of my eye catches my attention. I look and see a boy. He was a typical Swedish boy. Blonde hair, a little bowl haircut. That was more popular in the old days in Sweden. But his clothes were ragged and ripped. He was a typical Swedish boy. Blonde hair, a little bowl haircut. That was more popular in the old days in Sweden. But his clothes were ragged and ripped. There was blood, and in the rips of his clothes you could clearly see cut wounds. He had a very large cut in his throat, which indicated someone cut his throat, but he was transparent, enough to see through, but also enough to see his clothes. He had a very mad look, and the same eyes I saw when I was 5 years old. After looking at him for a couple of seconds, he turned around and walked up the stairs and disappeared. I was shocked, but didn't follow since I wasn't that stupid. This isn't one of those typical ghost stories where they follow and encounter some scary shit. No, I just didn't want to be affiliated with any paranormal crap. I can barely sleep already. After that encounter, I would still see him in the corner of my eye, but as soon as I looked at him, he disappeared. One day, I helped my mom clean the attic. We found some boxes which were left over from the other family who lived here. There were just some old books, but when I picked up a box, I found a sharp object under it. It looked like an old shave blade, or whatever it's called. It had some brown spots. They looked sort of brown reddish. I didn't think it had anything to do with the encounter of the boy at the time. But the next few days I started thinking about it and believed it had some sort of connection. I asked my mum what she did with the boxes. She said she had thrown everything away except the books. So it was too late. I've always woken up in the middle of the night because of the sounds of footsteps from the attic. I believe in science, but I also believe in God and ghosts. So I thought it was either mice or a ghost. When I was a kid, I loved Lego. When I grew older, I started playing with them less and less, and eventually stopped. One day when I was 13, I looked through my old boxes of Legos. In them, I found something very odd, an old Bible. Since I am not Christian, and nobody in my family is, it wasn't mine. I looked through it and found the word death in one of the pages, written in red. I didn't really care and put it back, but after I found the Bible, some very odd things started happening. One day I was looking through my Legos again. My boxes are contained under my bed inside a wardrobe thingy. I closed the wardrobe thingy and went out of my room. When I came back, they were open. It was very odd. I didn't think of poltergeists at the time, but when I went to sleep, I started thinking about it. I looked at the corner which the shadow used to be at, but nothing was there. I looked at my frame on my wall, and what I saw was an outline of a figure. I couldn't see the figure, so it was all black, but it looked like it looked at me. Have you ever felt a very bizarre feeling, like if something or someone is watching you? That's what I felt. One day I turned on the light. and there was just a picture of my country's flag. No figure, but as soon as I turned off the light, it returned to the figure shape, and the bizarre feeling returned. I whispered, "What do you want from me?" I didn't expect an answer, and I didn't get one either. One night I woke up because of the TV. It was on and the volume was very loud. Luckily, nobody from my family woke up. I looked under me, so the remote wasn't under me, and didn't turn on because of that. It was on the table in my room, so it would be impossible for me to have turned it on. I also started having very creepy nightmares. I remember one. I was in a forest. I know, typical ghost story nightmare. I see a black-haired woman walking towards me. I raised my hands and start fighting it off, and so far I was winning. But then I started running, and then I stopped. I couldn't move, and she got closer, faster and faster. Eventually she's about half a meter away, and she stopped. She was smiling manically, and she opened her mouth, and then she attacked me in a flash, like a snake, and I woke up. I started having very similar nightmares, with me fighting something off, then being frozen, etc. I remember the most terrifying one. I was a Swedish boy playing hide and seek with a friend, and I'm going to hide. I find a very good spot in a bush. Might seem like a bad spot, but it was a very compact forest and hard to find details. I was giggling and thinking he will never find me. Suddenly, someone grabs me by the shoulder and holds his hands in front of my mouth. The man was blonde with short hair, very muscular and tall. He could have easily beat me to death. I couldn't scream, not make a sound. He drags me to a cottage close by. He binds me to a wooden beam in his house, and then takes a shaving blade and starts to torture me by cutting me in the arm, chest, legs, stomach, etc. And I couldn't make a sound. I couldn't find an exact picture of the man in my dreams. This was the best I found. I wanted to, but I couldn't. You guys have probably had dreams where you couldn't make a sound. The dream ends with him slitting my throat with the blade, and I wake up. I fall asleep again, and when I woke up, I had wounds on my arm. Not like cutting wounds, but I had bruises, and places on my arms were red. They were all the spots the man had cut me in my dream, though I didn't have anything on my throat. I started thinking about the dream, and then I started thinking about the boy in the stairs, with the cut throat, the cut wounds and ripped clothes. It scared me, and to this point, I was sure it wasn't a coincidence. Maybe the boy wanted me to know what happened. This is where my story ends. Yes, it is a very bad ending, but this is where it ends. I am now 23 years old and haven't had many encounters since that dream. I still have bad dreams and wake up with red spots and bruises, but nothing else. I think that was what the boy wanted. He wanted someone to know. He can rest in peace. Well, once again, this is where it all ends. It is now up to you to believe in what I have shared or not. I wanted to share my extraordinary experience to give you guys chills, and take it off my shoulders by sharing. Thank you for reading. Finger licking good. My Uncle Greg was the greatest fry cook of all time. I know that's a bold statement, considering there are fantastic chefs all over the world, but when it came to deep frying, my uncle was the best. In Kentucky, deep frying isn't just a cooking method, it's a way of life. We're the state that gave the world the Colonel's secret recipe, after all. We have a global reputation we have to protect. The most popular deep fried dish is easily chicken, but plenty of other meats taste great when coated in breading and burnt to a crisp in boiling hot oil. Fish, poultry, beef, pork, even sweets. Deep fried soda, ice cream, candy bars, even deep fried butter. Do you know what a hush puppy is? It's a clump of fried coating. But there's more to the art of deep fried cuisine than just the oil, marinating your ingredients, seasoning them, and what I would argue is the most important part, the dry rub. My uncle was a master of the dry rub. When he set up a booth at the state fair every year, people would line up for what seemed like miles to get their hands on his dishes. Pickled braised jumbo ribs, double battered butter burgers, chicken fried nacho sausages, mac and cheese chili poppers, and his unforgettable spicy, extra crispy chicken. He knew how to take the most absurd flavour combinations you could think of and always find a way to make them taste amazing. Cheese, ranch, onion, bacon, you name the flavour and he mastered it. The man was a hillbilly scientist. He'd spend hours on his outdoor kitchen patio, combining ingredients, testing different seasonings and spices, trying to find the boldest flavour combinations possible. One summer, I helped him prepare dinner for a family reunion, and I couldn't keep up. By the time I was getting my cutting board ready, he already had 6 different entrees prepared. He won awards from every food festival in town, topped every eating contest. He was a local celebrity, more famous and influential than the mayor, but it wasn't enough for him. He had an appetite that only ever grew stronger. He was 500 pounds by the time I entered high school, and he only ever seemed to get fatter. He didn't want to be known as the best fry cook in Kentucky. He wanted to take over the whole world. His extra crispy, extra spicy, extra fattening chicken was his magnum opus, the Citizen Kane of poultry dishes. It was so hot it could melt your head off, but so delicious you'd be just a pair of feet before you put it down. It was salty, savoury, sweet, just the right amount of stringent and sour. It satisfied any flavour profile. It was decadent, the kind of food biblical kings and ancient Egyptian emperors would eat, the kind of food the gods on Mount Olympus would dine on. It was fantastic, and it was always getting better. Uncle Greg was constantly tweaking his dry rub, his marinade, his breading, his aromatics, constantly adding new spices and taking old ones out. He emptied out entire shelves at superstores, butcher shops and Asian markets. Strangers would visit his house in the middle of the night to ask how his newest batch of chicken was coming along, and he'd stand outside late into the night telling them all about it. Then came the day he finally found it, the perfect mix of everything he had made up to this point, the ultimate dry rub, a masterpiece of marinade, and the world's best breading. He went through 16 entire chickens in less than a week. It tasted so good. The smell was so intoxicating. I could smell it from halfway across town. He had done it. He had finally found the perfect flavour. Everything tasted amazing with it. Chicken and turkey were the first meats he tried, and soon he experimented with beef, pork and lamb. He fried just about every fish in the sea and every vegetable in the ground. He fried fruit, he fried candy, he fried bread. He'd even fried chicken skin and eat it like potato chips. Unfortunately, we never got to try his new secret recipe. He stopped coming to family gatherings. Never bother with state fairs again. Never even left his house. He wanted it all to himself. Even his wife didn't know the recipe. She was growing more and more concerned by the day. She was a health nut. Never bothered eating what her husband made. They didn't even use the same kitchen. So at first, it all slipped under the radar. However, by the time he had built a shanty wall around his patio to keep the smoke from escaping, she knew something was very wrong. He had drained their savings dry by buying all sorts of fatty meats, and eventually she closed all their accounts and refused to buy him anything new. He started digging through the trash using rotten food from the back of the fridge. It didn't matter to him. The brine and skin would make it all taste amazing to him. The way the rotten ingredients squished and oozed as he chomped down, it was like they had some kind of creamy filling. By the time she left the house, his wife was the last thing on his mind. When I cooked with my Uncle Greg, one thing I always thought was funny was when I would dip the chicken into the batter and roll it around in the breading. My fingers would get coated in the stuff. It made my fingers look like giant uncooked chicken tenders. Apparently, Uncle Greg noticed this too. He'd always lick the batter off his pudgy fingers like a wild animal, but it was never as good as crunching down on the fried stuff. One day, he got a little too curious. He looked at his fingers covered in coating and was salivating uncontrollably. In the blink of an eye, an impulse overcame him, and the rational part of his brain shut right off. He slammed his fingers down into the hot grease and held them there for a good 5 minutes. He made horrific, painful screams in pain, like a dying rabbit, but after the first 2 minutes, the nerve endings in his hand died and he felt nothing. When he pulled his hand out, his fingers were a shining golden brown, and the lower parts of his hand, all the way down to his wrist, had turned grey, with all the veins protruding out. Black as night, he pulled his hand to his face and took a big bite into his thumb, hard enough to snap the bone in half. He chomped down on what remained of it, the breading crunching and crisping loudly in his jaws. He chewed on the rest of his fingers, from the index all the way down to the pinky. He wasn't finished yet. He stuck the rest of his hand into his buttermilk marinade, rolled it around in the breading, and repeated the process all over. This time, chomping down on his palm while coating it in nacho cheese, onion ranch, and a side of chopped celery, to be healthy. He deep fried his severed wrist and keep frying his arm past the elbow, all the way down to his shoulder blade. Legend has it, he didn't bleed a single drop. I don't know how that would be possible. Maybe the oil cauterized the wounds. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but neither does eating your entire arm with a side of Doritos and some blue cheese dipping sauce. He repeated the whole process with his other arm, then his right leg, and then the left. When paramedics finally found him, his entire face was golden brown. Apparently, he stuck his whole face in the pot, fried it to a crisp, and then used the other to scrape it off so he could eat it. Then, when his face was nothing but gooey red mush, he jammed it back in there and fried it again, drowning in the boiling grease before he could further mutilate himself. I found his secret recipe when the rest of the family were rummaging through the house, dividing his belongings among themselves. I ripped it up and threw it in the garbage. I don't care how good it tastes. If it was delicious enough to make you eat yourself alive, it was too good. My uncle was the greatest fry cook who ever lived. Unfortunately, sometimes being the best isn't always a good thing. A full belly. 3 weeks ago, they had only mentioned it. One little attack on an old lady wasn't worth even 10 seconds on the national news. The only reason it even made it was the odd cannibalistic aspect of the attack. It wasn't just one attack though. By the week's end, it was 19. By the next day, it was 34. Each day was like this. The numbers grew exponentially. Then they stopped. No reports on any deaths, only specialists trying to brush away any worries the public had. They used large words and spoke confidently, and most people believed them. The numbers had to have been climbing, but no one seemed to worry. The everyday news, nearly every talk show ended with a few minutes of a PhD talking about this or that. Mass hysteria, they said. Satanic cults, they said. Even I fell into a catatonic trance from the false security. Everything was fine. If it weren't, wouldn't the government be doing something? It wasn't until I saw one at school that I found out how big a problem it had become. Its skin, tinted sickly green, like a seafoam green Crayola marker, was missing chunks or strips. I could see muscle, congealed, almost jelly-like. Blood ran a thick trail down its arm, and the dried variant splattered its tattered shirt. It was out in the yard, moving at a slow, shambling rate. Several of my classmates had recoiled, others making interested comments, and a select handful of brave students even raced to the window. Something primal in the back of my mind clicked on. Maybe it was fear. I couldn't tell you. All I knew was that it said, "Run," and I wasn't about to disagree with it. I was halfway down the main hallway before Mrs. Falloon could even begin to yell at me to come back. She had enough on her plate with the kids, who were now opening the window and calling to the mass of gore and pus. The sun was bright and pleasant when I burst through the door and out into the parking lot. Finally, I was trying to think and realised how stupid I was for doing this. I ran simply because some strange, vague hunch told me. I waited there, panting lightly. I'd catch my breath and head back in. I was in for a detention anyway. Might as well soak up a little sun. That was before a scream rang out, several more following it. I waited, paralysed, for what seemed like an eternity. The fire alarm screeched its warning, and I could hear the dull roar of 474 pairs of feet clamouring to get out, just as they were taught. Before the sea of people flooded the halls, I saw one of my classmates. Bright red splashes covered their clothes. A few more shambled clumsily to join the first. The fear began again, this time renewed, pure and urging. I bolted. I didn't live too far from the school, but the further I went, the more of those things I found. They were slow, thankfully, and stupid. Avoiding them didn't prove too difficult. The sights they brought, that's another story. Blood everywhere, bits of flesh and clothes, people screaming silently with huge gaping holes in their throats. They look at me with pleading eyes as those things feast on them. Quietly, I whispered a prayer for them. God, help them. I rounded a corner, my feet hitting the sidewalk hard. My legs ached and my lungs held the start of pain. I stopped only a moment, but even that was too short. It had already caught my eye. One of those things. It was a monster, really. Had my mother in its arms. She watched me with wide eyes. They were scared, like a deer's. She tried to cry out to me. I lunged forward and clawed at the thing. I pulled and tore at it like a wild animal. I don't remember when it sunk its teeth into me, but I know it did. The pain was white hot and spread like fire up my arm and through my body. I collapsed. The creature bit me more and more, teeth ripping away at my side, my legs. The fire rippled with each bite. My eyes screwed shut and I was screaming, but I can't remember hearing anything but the blood thumping in my ears. The bites became more infrequent, and the hand with the first bite turned cold and numb. My mother, bloody and crying, dragged herself close to me and touched her hand to my face. I couldn't feel it. The cold had spread. Soft gurgling noises, like listening to a drowning person, faded from my ears. Everything went icy and dark. It's a wonder how much you retain once you become one of those monsters. You wouldn't believe it, and you relive it every second of every day. It's a long, long road from humanity. I should know. My belly's filled with it. The Rake. During the summer of 2003, events in the northeastern United States involving a strange, human-like creature sparked brief local media interest before an apparent blackout was enacted. Little or no information was left intact, as most online and written accounts of the creature were mysteriously destroyed. Primarily focused in rural New York State and once found in Idaho, self-proclaimed witnesses told stories of their encounters with a creature of unknown origin. Emotions ranged from extremely traumatic levels of fright and discomfort to an almost childlike sense of playfulness and curiosity. While their published versions are no longer on record, the memories remained powerful. Several of the involved parties began looking for answers that year. In early 2006, the collaboration had accumulated nearly 24 documents dating between the 12th century and present day, spanning 4 continents. In almost all cases, the stories were identical. I've been in contact with a member of this group and was able to get some excerpts from their upcoming book. A Suicide Note, 1964. As I prepare to take my life, I feel it necessary to assuage any guilt or pain I have introduced through this act. It is not the fault of anyone other than him. For once I awoke and felt his presence, and once I awoke and saw his form. Once again I awoke and heard his voice, and looked into his eyes. I cannot sleep without fear of what I might next awake to experience. I cannot ever wake. Goodbye. Found in the same wooden box were 2 empty envelopes addressed to William and Rose, and 1 loose personal letter with no envelope. Dearest Linny, I have prayed for you. He spoke your name. A journal entry translated from Spanish, 1880. I have experienced the greatest terror. I have experienced the greatest terror. I have experienced the greatest terror. I see his eyes when I close mine. They are hollow, black. They saw me and pierced me. His wet hand. I will not sleep. His voice. Unintelligible text. Mariner's log, 1691. He came to me in my sleep. From the foot of my bed, I felt a sensation. He took everything. We must return to England. We shall not return here again, at the request of the Rake. From a witness, 2006. 3 years ago, I had just returned from a trip from Niagara Falls with my family for the 4th of July. We were all very exhausted after a long day of driving, so my husband and I put the kids right to bed and called it a night. At about 4 a.m, I woke up thinking my husband had gotten up to use the restroom. I used the moment to steal back the sheets, only to wake him in the process. I apologised and told him I thought he got out of bed. When he turned to face me, he gasped and pulled his feet up from the end of the bed so quickly his knee almost knocked me out of the bed. He then grabbed me and said nothing. After adjusting to the dark for half a second, I was able to see what caused the strange reaction. At the foot of the bed, sitting and facing away from us, there was what appeared to be a naked man or a large hairless dog of some sort. Its body position was disturbing and unnatural, as if it had been hit by a car or something. For some reason, I was not instantly frightened by it, but more concerned as to its condition. At this point, I was somewhat under the assumption that we were supposed to help him. My husband was peering over his arm and knee, tucked into the fetal position, occasionally glancing at me before returning to the creature. In a flurry of motion, the creature scrambled around the side of the bed and then crawled quickly in a flailing sort of motion right along the bed until it was less than a foot from my husband's face. The creature was completely silent for about 30 seconds, or probably closer to 5. It just seemed like a while, just looking at my husband. The creature then placed its hand on his knee and ran into the hallway, leading to the kids' rooms. I screamed and ran for the light switch, planning to stop him before he hurt my children. When I got to the hallway, the light from the bedroom was enough to see it crouching and hunched over about 20 feet away. He turned around and looked directly at me, covered in blood. I flipped the switch on the wall and saw my daughter, Clara. The creature ran down the stairs while my husband and I rushed to help our daughter. She was very badly injured and spoke only once more in her short life. She said, "He is the rake." My husband drove his car into a lake that night while rushing our daughter to the hospital. They did not survive. Being a small town, news got around pretty quickly. The police were helpful at first, and the local newspaper took a lot of interest as well. However, the story was never published, and the local television news never followed up either. For several months, my son Justin and I stayed in a hotel near my parents' house after we decided to return home. I began looking for answers myself. I eventually located a man in the next town over who had a similar story. We got in contact and began talking about our experiences. He knew of 2 other people in New York who had seen the creature we now refer to as the rake. It took the 4 of us about 2 solid years of hunting on the internet and writing letters to come up with a small collection of what we believe to be accounts of the rake. None of them gave any details, history or follow-up. One journal had an entry involving the creature in its first 3 pages and never mentioned it again. A ship's log explained nothing of the encounter, saying only that they were told to leave by the rake. That was the last entry in the log. There were, however, many instances where the creature's visit was one of a series of visits with the same person. Multiple people also mentioned being spoken to, my daughter included. This led us to wonder if the rake had visited any of us before our last encounter. I set up a digital recorder near my bed and left it running all night, every night, for 2 weeks. I would tediously scan through the sounds of me rolling around in my bed each day. When I woke up, by the end of the second week, I was quite used to the occasional sound of sleep while blurring through recording at 8 times the normal speed. This still took almost an hour every day. On the first day of the third week, I thought I heard something different. What I found was a shrill voice. It was the rake. I can't listen to it long enough to even begin to transcribe it. I haven't let anyone listen to it yet. All I know is that I've heard it before and now believe that it spoke when it was sitting in front of my husband. I don't remember hearing anything at the time, but for some reason the voice on the recorder immediately brings me back to that moment. The thoughts that must have gone through my daughter's head make me very upset. I have not seen the rake since he ruined my life, but I know that he has been in my room while I slept. I know and fear that one night I'll wake up to see him staring at me. Dinner is now served. The forest seemed to be a void of green as I ran through it, a never-ending mess of trees and shrubbery. I felt my feet stamp down on sharp sticks and thorns, but I never felt any pain. After dealing with the harshness of this tropical rainforest, the soles of my feet had become hard and sturdy. I doubt even a freshly broken piece of glass could penetrate through the rough skin. Not that I'd ever get to test it. Each bound I made, I got further and faster towards what I was looking for. I knew how to track animals, so this wouldn't be too hard. Follow the prints, look for broken branches, think like the hunted. I could hear it run as well. It was clumsy and making too much noise. Suddenly the thing stopped running. I could have heard its heavy breathing from a mile away, but instead of catching up to it, I stopped as well. This chase had barely started. I hadn't had a lot of fun yet. Survival is also about entertainment, not just nourishment. If I was to survive on this island, I had to keep myself occupied, keep reminding myself that I was alive. Otherwise, there is little stopping me from falling into madness. I could see it through the trees. It had come into a clearing, and it was now resting, trying to catch its breath. I decided to get a better look at it. I scampered up a tree using my hands and feet as hooks, swinging around the branches, a monkey performing for no one. I came to a branch that viewed down on the clearing. Now it was looking around, wondering where its pursuer had gone. Also from my branch there was a wide gap in the trees. The view sprawled out, showing a blanket of trees, rising and falling with the changing levels of the landscape. Beyond the green was the blue of the ocean that had damned me to this wretched, God-forsaken island, where I had made my home. Its waves had destroyed my vessel, thrown away my crewmates like rats, and then brought me to fester here. Neither heaven nor hell. I would remain in this limbo until my decaying corpse fertilizes the soil. I looked back down at my prey. It was still looking around, trying to find me. It was only a matter of time before it would look above and see me. Good. I wanted it to. No run, no fun was my motto. As I thought it began looking up in the trees, our eyes met. There was a hesitation before it once again bolted off into the forest. I let out a loud whoop, and the chase was back on. As I kept running, I saw herds of animals run quickly into the vegetation, startled by the disturbance that my prey and I were causing in this usually peaceful sanctuary, previously free from the chaos of humankind caused. I saw flashes of all sorts of exotic animals, large and small, but I never paid any attention. I had already locked onto my target, and any distractions could prove disastrous. I stopped again. Silence. It had stopped running again. I couldn't hear it anymore. No breathing, nothing. It was hiding from me. I looked around, slowly drawing my makeshift knife that I had crafted from a piece of sharp stone. Where are you? Come on. I know you're there, I said, not really talking to anyone. Sometimes the sound of your own voice can increase your determination and confidence. A large thing jumped out the bushes, coming straight for me. It got me from behind, so I wheeled around and jabbed the knife into its side. It screamed in pain and struck me in the head. I stumbled back, dazed, more from the shock than the pain. I saw it scramble away clumsily. Due to the wound I had inflicted, I got my senses in a few seconds, spitting out some blood on the grass. I adjusted my bow on my back. Now it was going to end. After being injured, the thing was now a lot easier to track. Blood made a trail on the trees and plants as it stumbled over logs. I could just make out the colour of it slowly disappear. I ran along to the side so I could cut it off. It then appeared in the gap in the trees, a perfect opportunity. I pulled out an arrow and clipped it onto my bow. I pulled the string back. Closing one eye to aim, I let go and the arrow flew through the air, whistling as it went. I heard a thunk, a painful shout, and the sound of a body collapse onto the forest floor. I walked slowly over to my prey, stone dagger in hand to finish it off. I saw it writhing on the floor, the arrow I had shot sticking out the back of its shoulder. It twisted to see the predator that had finally shot it down. Broadbent. The sailor shouted in confusion. "Good day, Lieutenant," I replied calmly. "Nice to see you." "What the devil are you doing?" I squatted down next to him. "Surviving, sir, surviving." I raised the dagger, and before he could cry out in protest, I brought it down into his throat. Dinner is served. And that's it for tonight, my little hellhounds. Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed tonight's scary stories, then don't forget to subscribe and click the like button and click the bell icon to get notified every time I upload. If you have any scary stories you would like narrated on the channel, then submit them to Reddit r/homeofscares and follow me on Twitter at homeofscares. Now, good night, my little hellhounds.